God is dead, and we have killed him. When Friedrich Nietzsche first wrote these words in The Gay Science, he wasn't just being poetic, he was ringing an alarm. This wasn't a celebration of atheism versus religion, but a philosophical earthquake. Nietzsche wasn't mocking belief, he was diagnosing a cultural breakdown. For centuries, God had been the foundation of morality, law, and meaning. But now, in the age of reason and science, that foundation was crumbling. If you take a walk through any modern university or scroll through social media debates, the question isn't just, is God real? It's, do we even need him anymore? That's the real core of the God is dead explained dilemma. And whether you're spiritual or skeptical, that shift affects everyone. Think about it. The old churches are emptying, but we're not replacing them with silence. We're filling them with noise. Celebrities become prophets. Political ideologies become new gospels. Even AI now gets treated like an oracle. This is what Nietzsche feared. He called it the death of God philosophy, not because we proved God wrong, but because we stopped needing him to make sense of the world. But something always fills the void. When divine authority fades, we don't become freer. We often become more desperate. Just scroll through TikTok. You'll see a generation drowning in self-help and craving identity. That's the philosophy of God colliding with the existence of God argument in real time. The phrase God is dead isn't about theology, it's about consequence. Nietzsche was warning us, if we tear down the temple, we'd better have something to replace it with. That's why this isn't a critique of Christianity alone. It's a mirror to our entire modern culture. Many people today say they've left religion, but still hold on to Christian virtue without the Christian God. They talk about love, justice, equality, but where do those values come from, if not from a higher order? The criticism of Christianity becomes a paradox. We want the morals, but not the maker. This contradiction lies at the heart of the God is dead meaning. Imagine building a house and then deciding to remove its foundation. You might enjoy the extra space for a while, until the walls start to crack. That's what happens when societies reject the metaphysical roots of morality. Nietzsche wasn't saying why God doesn't exist from a place of rebellion. He was mourning a death we didn't even notice had happened. It's not a shout, it's a whisper. And that whisper echoes today in the rise of nihilism and God, in the feeling that nothing really matters anymore. Depression, anxiety, and loneliness are skyrocketing, and we keep wondering why. We've replaced stained glass with screens, pulpits with podcasts, scriptures with algorithms. That's not inherently wrong. But here's the twist. The things we now worship are silent when we cry. They offer dopamine, not redemption. When Nietzsche talked about the death of God, he foresaw this spiritual drought. And now, as AI writes prayers and influencers become saviors, we're left wondering, who speaks for the soul? It's the death of God philosophy playing out in real time. You don't have to look far, just watch how quickly faith is replaced with followers. Some argue, but science gives us truth. Sure, science gives us knowledge, but not meaning. A telescope can show you a galaxy. It can't tell you why you're crying at 3 a.m. This is where religion versus science misses the point. They answer different questions. And when one kills the other, the questions don't disappear, they haunt us. This is why Nietzsche didn't just spark in his God real debate. He forced us to look in the mirror. And what we saw was terrifying. A species that lost its compass but still pretends it knows the way. In the absence of God, are we more free or more lost? This video is not about bashing belief or glorifying atheism. It's about tracing the cracks in the ground we walk on. The Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy is uncomfortable because it makes us responsible. We kill God, yes, but what have we built in his place? Consumerism? Politics? Celebrity cults? Can those things carry the weight of existence? If not, we've got a bigger problem than belief. We've got a vacuum of meaning. And that vacuum, it doesn't stay empty for long. Which brings us to the next chapter, the deeper layer of Nietzsche's warning. Nietzsche's words, God is dead, weren't fireworks. They were funeral bells. And if you read The Gay Science or Thus Spoke Zarathustra, you'll notice he wasn't gloating. He was grieving, not because he loved religion, but because he understood what it meant to lose it. When God dies in a society, it's not just churches that collapse. It's the entire scaffolding of morality, truth, and purpose. It's like removing the heart of a body and wondering why the limbs won't move. That's the God is dead explained moment in history. Nietzsche saw it coming before anyone else did. Picture Europe in the 19th century, industrial growth booming, scientific discoveries replacing myths, and the Enlightenment pushing reason to the front stage. But beneath that progress was a spiritual earthquake. People had stopped believing in the Christian God, but hadn't let go of Christian morals. That's what disturbed Nietzsche. He said it clearly, we killed God, but we're still wearing his clothes. That contradiction was unsustainable, and that's why he called for something radical. Not just an atheism versus religion fight, but a total reinvention of how we create meaning. This wasn't a rebellion, it was an awakening. Enter the Übermensch, Nietzsche's solution to the mess we made. This wasn't a superhero. It was a metaphor. Someone who doesn't lean on divine commandments or inherited dogmas, but builds values from within. The Übermensch is what comes after the death of God philosophy. And while it sounds dramatic, it's deeply practical. Instead of saying thou shalt, it says, I will. Think of it like moving from a copy-paste life to one you actually write yourself. Nietzsche wasn't selling despair. He was daring people to grow up spiritually, to become the authors of their own morality. But this wasn't easy. Imagine waking up one day and realizing the road you've followed your whole life suddenly ends in a cliff. That's how Nietzsche described the future of a world without God. Without a universal truth, humanity risks falling into nihilism and God-shaped holes, where nothing matters and anything goes. We've seen that in modern culture: rising apathy, moral confusion, a hunger for meaning that no tech or trend can satisfy. The vacuum Nietzsche predicted is no longer philosophical. It's emotional, political, even personal. You can find echoes of it in rising existential crises and social unrest. It's important to understand that Nietzsche wasn't just criticizing Christianity. He was criticizing dependency. He challenged the entire philosophy of God as a crutch. For him, it was time humanity stood on its own feet. He believed true greatness comes when individuals stop looking up for answers and start looking inward. And in today's world, where everyone's searching for external validation, from social media likes to guru approval, that message hits harder than ever. Nietzsche didn't ask, is God real? He asked, if God is dead, who will you become? That's a scarier question. Some modern thinkers argue that Nietzsche was misunderstood, that he wasn't killing God, but diagnosing our cultural fatigue. He saw that belief, once vibrant, had become mechanical. People went to church out of habit, not hunger. They prayed because their parents did, not because they felt the presence of something divine. That's why the Nietzsche God is dead idea is so timeless. It's not about theology, it's about authenticity. Are we living what we believe? Or just pretending? In that sense, Nietzsche was more prophet than destroyer. He didn't bring the storm. He just described the clouds. And yet, even today, people fear his words. God is dead still sparks outrage in the is God real debate. But maybe it should spark reflection instead. Maybe it's not a declaration, it's a diagnosis. A mirror held up to a culture running on autopilot. Nietzsche didn't want us to despair, he wanted us to awaken. He didn't tell us to burn the old maps, he told us to draw new ones. But before we can rebuild, we need to face a hard truth. Much of what we call belief is built on shaky ground. And that brings us to the next chapter, the house of faith, and the logic that holds it up, or doesn't. There's a familiar phrase often tossed around. The Bible is true because it says so. At first, it sounds comforting. But when you stop and think, really think, it reveals a deep flaw in reasoning. This is what philosophers call circular logic. You can't prove something using the very thing you're trying to prove. It's like saying Superman exists because a comic book said so. Nietzsche saw this as a key problem in the existence of God argument. Faith built this way doesn't challenge the mind, it pacifies it. And in a world where critical thinking is rare, that's a dangerous thing. This isn't about attacking believers. It's about protecting the truth. If someone told you that a bridge was safe because the sign said so, would you still cross it without checking the structure? Of course not. Yet that's what many do with holy texts. This isn't just criticism of Christianity. It's a wake-up call for any belief that refuses to be questioned. Nietzsche, in the heart of the Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy, argued that blind belief leads to spiritual laziness. When you fear doubt more than you fear being wrong, you're not practicing faith, you're avoiding growth. Let's take a real-world example. In many fundamentalist circles, children are taught from birth that every word in the Bible is literal truth. No questions allowed. No contradictions admitted. This is not education, it's indoctrination. And Nietzsche would say, if your belief system can't handle a few tough questions, is it worth believing in? The is God real debate has to allow inquiry. If we can question political leaders and scientific theories, surely we can question divine claims too. After all, truth has nothing to fear from examination. Only lies do. Nietzsche didn't reject God because he was rebellious. He rejected the reasoning that tried to protect God from scrutiny. He believed that a truly powerful idea doesn't need to be insulated from criticism, it thrives on it. That's why the God is dead meaning isn't just about religion fading. It's about a culture that stopped asking why and started saying, because it's written. Faith became about memorizing, not understanding. Worship turned into routine. And when that happens, belief loses its soul. What's left is performance without conviction. There's another issue here, what Nietzsche called herd morality. People believe what the group believes because it's easier than standing alone. In that environment, circular logic becomes a safety net. It tells you, don't worry about the hard stuff, just trust what everyone else does. But Nietzsche's philosophy of God warned that this comfort is a trap. True spiritual growth requires discomfort. It requires doubt, struggle, even moments of despair. Because only by wrestling with your beliefs can you ever truly own them. Interestingly, many modern Christian apologists try to get around this by layering logic on top of faith. They use phrases like historical reliability or fulfilled prophecy to back the Bible's authority. And while that's a step toward honest dialogue, it still often circles back to the same foundation. Faith in the text because the text told you to have faith. Nietzsche would call this dressing the same argument in new clothes. And if that's all we're doing, then the atheism versus religion debate is stuck on repeat. Progress means letting go of what doesn't hold up under pressure. So where do we go from here? If scripture can't prove itself, and belief requires more than obedience, what's the next step? Nietzsche's answer wasn't cynicism, it was courage. The courage to ask the hard questions, to let go of easy answers, to build your worldview on what stands up to fire, not what hides from it. And that means stepping into the uncomfortable territory where the church once reigned with certainty and confronting the historical paradoxes that still haunt its legacy. That's the next chapter, and it's not an easy one. Christianity often paints itself as the faith of the oppressed, the persecuted minority standing strong against a hostile world. And sure, in its earliest days, Christians faced real danger under Roman rule. But here's the twist. Once Christianity gained power, it didn't just seek freedom, it demanded dominance. Nietzsche saw this shift as deeply troubling. The faith that once preached humility now ruled with iron fists. This contradiction lies at the heart of criticism of Christianity, and it's not just historical. It echoes in the present, in how religious institutions continue to wield influence over politics, education, and morality. Let's talk facts. The Crusades weren't acts of peace, they were campaigns of blood. The Inquisition didn't search for truth, it hunted heresy with torture. Galileo wasn't celebrated by the church, he was silenced. Nietzsche didn't just read about these things, he understood their impact on the soul of Western civilization. To him, this wasn't a question of is God real debate. It was about what happens when belief turns into control. The very institution built to reflect divine love became an engine of fear. And that, he believed, corrupted the spiritual instincts of millions. This is where Nietzsche introduced the idea of slave morality. In his view, Christianity didn't just glorify humility, it glorified weakness. It took pride in suffering. It exalted guilt. He saw it as a system built not on strength and creativity, but on resentment toward those who had power. This is one of the most controversial ideas in Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy, but it's worth unpacking. Imagine being taught that ambition is sinful, that desire is dangerous, that pleasure is a trap. For Nietzsche, this wasn't holiness. It was self-sabotage dressed in robes. And the paradox gets deeper. Today, Christianity still presents itself as under attack. But let's be honest, in many parts of the world, especially in the US, the church is one of the most powerful institutions. It influences elections. It shapes education policies. It lobbies laws around gender, reproduction, and science. Yet when questioned, it claims persecution. Nietzsche predicted this double standard. He warned that without God, the old moral frameworks would cling to their thrones even as their spiritual authority faded. That's the God is dead explained from a political angle, and it's still happening. Think of the rise of megachurches, where pastors wear designer sneakers and preach prosperity while quoting a homeless carpenter. This isn't spirituality, it's branding. It's religion as spectacle. Nietzsche saw this show coming. He warned that when faith loses its heart, it becomes theater. The death of God philosophy wasn't about doctrine. It was about the soul of a civilization becoming hollow. And now, with Christianity trying to fit into modern trends while still claiming eternal truth, it stands on shaky ground. You can't have both radical humility and Instagram fame. What Nietzsche feared wasn't just hypocrisy, it was stagnation. When a religion stops evolving, it starts enforcing. That's why the church often clashes with science and philosophy. It's not because they're incompatible, it's because one changes and the other resists. In this tug-of-war, the religion versus science battle becomes symbolic of a larger struggle, truth versus control. And here's the real kicker. When people sense the control but not the truth, they leave. That's why younger generations are walking away, not out of rebellion, but out of disillusionment. So where does that leave us? If the historical legacy of Christianity is so tangled, faith and violence, love and fear, what do we do with it? Nietzsche didn't say throw it all away. He said, recognize the paradox. Don't pretend it never happened. Ask yourself what's worth keeping and what needs to be buried. Because if we don't clear the rubble, we can't build anything new. And that brings us to a force even more powerful than tradition, the steady, unrelenting light of science, and how it slowly replaced the divine. There was a time when lightning was divine punishment, disease was a curse, and the stars were holes in the sky letting heaven's light shine through. But with every scientific breakthrough, the territory of mystery, once ruled by God, began to shrink. This is the essence of the God is dead explained movement in modern culture. Nietzsche saw this happening in his time. He wasn't a scientist, but he could see the writing on the wall. As reason rose, reverence declined. The more we understood the universe, the less we needed a divine interpreter. Let's look at examples. Germ theory dethroned the idea that illness was God's punishment. Telescopes showed us galaxies far beyond a Genesis timeline. Evolution challenged the notion that humans were crafted in God's image on day 6. These shifts weren't small, they were tectonic. Nietzsche recognized that science doesn't just offer new answers, it dismantles old ones. And while some tried to fit scripture into scientific frameworks, the cracks were obvious. The death of God philosophy wasn't about proving God wrong. It was about realizing the divine was slowly being edged out of relevance. Yet there's resistance. Many still argue that religion versus science is a false dichotomy, that they can coexist. And in some cases, that's true. But Nietzsche wasn't buying that peace treaty. He believed most attempts at harmony were concessions made by faith to survive, not mutual respect. When a preacher quotes quantum physics or a scientist quotes Psalms, you have to ask, are we building bridges or disguising the conflict? Nietzsche warned that if belief bends too far to avoid breaking, it loses all shape. And once that happens, the philosophy of God becomes fog. There's also the God of the gaps. As science explains more, God is pushed into smaller corners. First it was thunder, then love, then consciousness. But as neuroscience grows and AI expands, even these areas are being mapped. So what's left for God to govern? Some say morality, others say the soul. But Nietzsche argued that even these can and must be rebuilt without divine instruction. Otherwise, we're just anchoring ethics to an invisible ruler. That's why the existence of God argument loses ground, because the ground beneath it is constantly changing. Take the example of AI today. Machines can now write poems, mimic human conversation, and even compose symphonies. A few years ago, that would have been called divine. Now it's just code. This isn't just technological progress, it's a philosophical revolution. We're replacing miracles with mechanics. And Nietzsche would say, this is both thrilling and terrifying. Because if humans no longer need God to explain the unexplainable, the real question becomes, do we need him at all? That's the edge of the is God real debate in the 21st century. Science doesn't claim to answer every question, but it asks them with honesty. It doesn't promise salvation, it promises understanding. That's why it threatens faith not through violence, but through clarity. Nietzsche admired that. He saw science as the flame that burns away illusion. But here's the tension. Science can tell us how the brain works when we fall in love, but it can't explain why heartbreak feels like dying. That's the space where belief still breathes. And yet, belief is struggling to keep up. That's the quiet storm behind the nihilism and God collapse. So what now? If science dethrones God as the ultimate authority, who or what rises in his place? Some say reason, others say humanism. But Nietzsche knew that data alone doesn't fulfill the soul. That's why his warning wasn't just about losing God, it was about losing meaning. And as we move forward into a world of machines and algorithms, the question becomes deeper. Can we find purpose in a world where the stars are just gas and our thoughts are just neurons? If not, we may not be ready for the next chapter, the seductive power of belief and why we still cling to it. Despite all the logic, science, and secularism in the world, belief refuses to die. Why? Because belief isn't just intellectual, it's emotional. It fills a void that facts can't reach. When a mother loses her child, it's not string theory she turns to, it's heaven. When life becomes unbearable, most people don't seek data, they seek hope. Nietzsche understood this better than most. He knew that even if God is dead explained our moral collapse, the psychological need for comfort remained. And that need, whether met by religion, astrology, or ideology, is what often keeps us from falling apart. Belief offers more than answers, it offers meaning. Pain becomes sacrifice, death becomes a doorway, poverty becomes a test. That kind of framing isn't rational, but it's powerful. Nietzsche didn't despise religion because it was silly, he feared it because it was seductive. The Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy warns us not about faith itself, but about the comfort that robs us of truth. When belief soothes too well, it can turn into anesthesia. And a world that's numbed by illusion is one that never wakes up to its own strength or responsibility. Think about how religion handles injustice. A child dies, and someone says, it was God's plan. A man loses everything, and people whisper, there's a reason for this. These phrases comfort the speaker more than the sufferer. Nietzsche would ask, is that love, or is it fear disguised as faith? In his eyes, this was the dangerous side of the philosophy of God, the way it turned tragedy into theology and kept people passive in the face of real suffering. Instead of changing the world, many chose to accept it. And that's how injustice survives. Now consider the social dimension. Belief gives us belonging. It connects us to others who share the same values, the same rituals, the same Sunday morning routines. That's a powerful human need. Nietzsche knew that humans aren't just thinkers, we're tribe builders. And for many, the church isn't just a house of worship. It's their family, their culture, their identity. That's why the is God real debate often feels like an attack, even when it's not. Questioning faith can feel like questioning someone's entire life story. And yet, if we never question, we never evolve. Nietzsche's challenge was brutal, but it was clear. Do you believe because it's true, or because it's useful. He wasn't against comfort, but he wanted us to know when we were being comforted. That's a big difference. Most people mistake belief for truth when really, it's a survival instinct. And that survival instinct is being marketed everywhere. Self-help books, manifestation gurus, and yes, even churches. When you look closely, the atheism versus religion debate often hides a deeper conflict: clarity versus comfort. And Nietzsche urged us to choose clarity, even if it hurts. This idea shows up in modern psychology too. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote that humans need meaning more than they need happiness. Without it, we break. That aligns deeply with Nietzsche's fears about nihilism and God. When belief dies and nothing takes its place, people don't just get bored, they fall into despair. Depression, addiction, and anxiety skyrocket when purpose fades. That's why belief clings on. Not because it's always true, but because without it, we often have nothing. And Nietzsche knew, nature abhors a vacuum. So, if belief is comforting but not always true, what are we supposed to do with it? Should we reject it entirely? Should we keep what feels good? Or should we build something better, something more honest, more human, more ours? Nietzsche didn't give us the full blueprint, but he did light the match. He asked us to burn away the illusions and sit with the discomfort. Because in that space, stripped of fantasy, real strength begins. And if you think morality crumbles without God, just wait for the next chapter, where we tackle the myth of virtue and the moral codes that may not be divine at all. You've probably heard it before. If God doesn't exist, what's stopping people from killing, stealing, or doing whatever they want? It's a popular line, quoted in debates, sermons, and late-night arguments. But let's pull the curtain back. Nietzsche saw this as a fear tactic, not a logical statement. The idea that without divine surveillance, humans would turn into monsters? That says more about your view of humanity than it does about God. It's a cornerstone of the existence of God argument, but it's built on shaky ground. After all, people commit atrocities both with and without religion. Here's what Nietzsche argued. Morality isn't a gift from above, it's a creation from within. Long before Christianity existed, humans had codes of honor, community rules, and systems of justice. Ancient Greece, China, and even indigenous cultures all had moral structures, despite having very different gods, or none at all. The God is dead meaning isn't that we lose morality, it's that we realize it was ours all along. That revelation isn't scary, it's empowering. It means we're not slaves to commandments. We're responsible for shaping the good, not just receiving it. Now let's address the Bible. People love to say it's the foundation of Western ethics. But if you actually read it, cover to cover, you'll find a lot that clashes with modern values. Slavery is accepted. Genocide is commanded. Women are often treated as property. That's not cherry-picking, it's text. Nietzsche saw this and called it out. He didn't hate scripture. He hated when it was used blindly. If someone quotes the Bible to define virtue, the next question should be, which parts? The criticism of Christianity here is simple. Don't pretend something is flawless when it clearly isn't. The real danger, Nietzsche said, is using divine authority to avoid moral responsibility. When people say, "It's not me, it's God's will," they're outsourcing their conscience. That's how atrocities happen in the name of faith. Think crusades, witch trials, colonization. Even today, hateful laws are passed by people who claim they're just following scripture. That's not morality. It's obedience masquerading as virtue. And that's why the Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy calls for a new foundation, one built on human reflection, not sacred rules written in ancient languages. Let's take an example from modern times. LGBTQ+ rights have often clashed with religious teachings. Many argue that being gay is a sin because the Bible says so. But Nietzsche would ask, what if the Bible is wrong? What if our evolving understanding of love and dignity should override a verse written 3,000 years ago? That's the tension between religion versus science, but also between static morality and dynamic compassion. Morality that never changes isn't morality, it's dogma. And dogma kills empathy. This is where Nietzsche's concept of the will to power comes in. Instead of following a divine blueprint, he believed we should actively shape our values, not by dominating others, but by elevating ourselves. True morality, in this view, is crafted, not copied. It's about asking, what kind of world do I want to live in, and then living accordingly. This terrifies institutions that rely on conformity, but it's essential if we want to move beyond the ghost of a morality that's no longer serving us. That's the deeper layer of the death of God philosophy, freedom through creation. So if God isn't the author of goodness, then who is? You are. I am. We all are. And that's not blasphemy, it's responsibility. Nietzsche wasn't pushing chaos. He was pushing accountability. Without a celestial referee, it's on us to build a world worth living in. That means rejecting virtue that's inherited blindly and embracing values we've wrestled with, questioned, and earned. Because if everyone means something different by God, how do we even know what we're talking about? That's the next chapter, and it gets even stranger. When someone says, "I believe in God," the room nods in agreement. But ask 5 people what they actually mean, and you'll get 5 different answers. For some, God is the Father of Jesus. For others, He's the universe, or energy, or even a digital architect simulating our reality. Nietzsche would say, if a word means everything, it means nothing. That's the illusion we live with. We think we're agreeing, but we're not. This is the God is dead explained moment dressed in modern confusion. The language stayed, but the meanings fractured. This is what philosophers call projection. We take what we fear, what we hope for, what we can't explain, and we project it onto an idea called God. But your projection isn't mine, and mine isn't hers. So when we all say God, we're often just nodding at different shadows. Nietzsche saw this as a core issue in the existence of God argument. Not just whether God is real, but whether the God you worship is anything more than a reflection of yourself. And in that gap, misunderstanding thrives. Nietzsche wasn't offended by people believing in God. He was frustrated that the conversation never went deep enough. He wanted people to ask, which God? What nature? What morality? But instead, society settled for vague affirmations. It's like living in a house where everyone speaks the same words, but in different languages. That's not unity, it's noise. And in that noise, the is God real debate becomes harder to pin down. Because if God can mean a bearded man, a sacred frequency, or pure consciousness, how do we even begin to discuss him? This linguistic collapse has real consequences. Politicians invoke God to justify laws. But which God are they referring to? A wrathful judge? A gentle shepherd? A divine mother? The ambiguity allows them to appeal to emotion without accountability. That's the danger Nietzsche saw in the philosophy of God as it devolved. It stopped being a guiding force and became a rhetorical weapon. And the more diluted the word becomes, the easier it is to manipulate. A label with no clear content becomes a tool for whoever yells the loudest. Even inside churches, this confusion lives on. One believer thinks God wants justice, another thinks he wants submission. One says he loves all unconditionally, another says he'll damn you for loving the wrong person. They all say God, but they're not talking about the same being. And Nietzsche's point stands. If you can't define your God, how can you live by him? This is where the criticism of Christianity deepens, not in what people believe, but in how carelessly they hold those beliefs. Faith without clarity becomes performance, and performance, eventually, loses meaning. Take a look online. Influencers post, "Thank God," after winning awards. Soldiers pray before dropping bombs. Athletes kneel after touchdowns. But are they all connected to the same divine source? Or are they projecting their own desires onto a blank canvas? Nietzsche would argue the latter. He'd say God has become a mirror. People don't find him. They reflect themselves onto him. And that's why the death of God philosophy is also the death of shared meaning. Because if every person has their own God, no one really has won at all. So what happens when the foundation of belief becomes that unstable? When the word God means everything to everyone, and nothing to anyone. We don't get harmony, we get spiritual relativism. We don't build temples, we build echo chambers. Nietzsche saw this as the ultimate danger. Not that we'd reject God, but that we'd reduce him into a shapeshifter we use to justify anything. And in that collapse of consensus, a vacuum forms, one ready to be filled by power, money, and control. Which brings us to the final step. If God is gone, and meaning is ours to create, what do we build next? So here we are, standing in the aftermath of a metaphysical collapse. God is gone, Nietzsche says, not murdered by science, not dethroned by atheists, but forgotten, outgrown, displaced. And now, the world must face what comes next. This is the true essence of the God is dead meaning, not destruction, but vacancy, a spiritual silence begging to be filled. And what do we rush to put in that space? Celebrity, nationalism, consumption, ideology. Nietzsche didn't fear the absence of God. He feared what we might worship instead. This is where the concept of the Übermensch becomes crucial. Nietzsche envisioned a kind of human who rises beyond conventional belief, not to become a tyrant, but to become a creator, a moral architect, someone who, in the absence of a divine blueprint, picks up the pen and writes new meaning, not borrowed, not imposed, born from struggle, clarity, and self-overcoming. The Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy doesn't offer easy answers. It dares you to live without them. And in doing so, it demands that we stop acting like sheep and start acting like sculptors. The modern world is already experimenting with this. Think about secular humanism, where ethics are grounded not in heaven, but in human dignity. Or existentialism, where meaning isn't found, it's forged. Even movements like Stoicism and mindfulness echo this call. Look inward, take ownership, create order in the chaos. These aren't anti-God, they're post-God. And whether you call that the death of God philosophy or the evolution of human conscience, the shift is undeniable. We're not praying for meaning anymore. We're building it, brick by brick. But this freedom is terrifying. Without divine orders, every choice becomes your own. No cosmic judge, no eternal checklist. Just you, your mind, your will. And for many, that's too heavy. That's why nihilism and God are often spoken in the same breath. When the old meaning dies, there's a moment, sometimes years, of darkness. A free fall. Nietzsche called this the abyss. And it's not something you avoid. It's something you cross. The danger isn't the fall, it's refusing to jump. Clinging to dead structures is worse than building shaky new ones. Here's the honest truth. Some people will never leave the comfort of inherited belief. And that's okay. This isn't about superiority. It's about awareness. Nietzsche's message wasn't abandon your faith. It was don't lie to yourself about it. If your God is projection, know it. If your morality is inherited, test it. If your prayers are ritual, ask why. The is God real debate is far less important than the what comes after conversation. And that's where the power lies, in what we choose to do with this existential blank page. Think of artists, innovators, and revolutionaries. They don't wait for divine approval, they create. They challenge, fail, rebuild, and redefine. That's the Übermensch in practice. It's not about ego, it's about courage. The courage to write your values, to face suffering without wrapping it in theology, to build a life that reflects your truth, not tradition's convenience. That's the legacy Nietzsche hoped for. Not a world without morality, but a world where morality is earned, not inherited. And that world is being born right now, whether we're ready or not. So if God is dead, what rises in his place? That's the question. And your answer won't come from a book, or a priest, or a podcast. It will come from your choices, from how you live when no one's watching, from what you stand for when the crowd walks away. Because in this new era, there is no divine fallback, only human responsibility. That's the terrifying beauty of it all. And if you've followed Nietzsche this far, then you know the final chapter isn't written by him. It's written by you. God is dead. These words weren't written in triumph. They were carved in grief. Nietzsche didn't smile when he wrote them. He trembled, because he knew what they meant. Not just the end of belief, but the collapse of everything built on it. Morality, purpose, justice, eternity, gone, or at least shaken. And now, here we are, generations later, still caught in the aftershock. The God is dead explained moment isn't over. It's unfolding, inside churches, inside minds, inside algorithms that now answer questions once whispered in prayer. The question now isn't, did Nietzsche get it right? It's, what are we doing with the freedom his diagnosis revealed? If God no longer writes the rules, who does? If divine purpose no longer guides us, where do we go? That's the burden of this new age. And it's not a burden of despair, it's one of responsibility. The philosophy of God has shifted from heavens to hands, from divine command to human creation. And whether you're ready or not, that shift is already reshaping how we love, lead, learn, and live. Some will cling to the past. Others will try to replace God with wealth, power, or ideology. But none of these can bear the weight of the human soul. Nietzsche didn't just critique faith. He warned about what comes next when it vanishes. Nihilism and God are two sides of the same coin. Remove the infinite, and you risk believing in nothing. Or worse, believing in anything. That's the trap. And that's why this conversation is more than just intellectual, it's existential. It's not about whether God is real. It's about whether you are. So what now? Do you dismiss this as just another atheism versus religion rant? Or do you let it sit? Do you ask yourself what you believe and why? Because at the end of this journey, it's not Nietzsche you need to answer to. It's yourself. That's the true death of God philosophy. It doesn't leave you lost. It leaves you accountable. In a world where belief is optional, meaning must be earned. And that's the challenge. Not to destroy what was, but to become worthy of what could be. If this message made you think, if it challenged, bothered, or even stirred something in you, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who's still searching. Leave a comment and tell me, what do you believe now? Because this is just the beginning of the Is God Real debate. A debate not about facts or verses, but about who we are when no one's watching. And if God is truly gone, maybe it's finally time we start building something holy in his absence.